the way I look at it now is the main lesson I've taken out of it is you just have to keep going, like just don't stop. And as tempting as it is in any situation to quit or talk yourself into going in a different direction or not doing something, you've just got to just keep going. And I know that sounds really simple, but that's what I tell myself these days is just keep moving forward. Keep moving forward.
Find a way,
and just keep moving forward and don't. And I think it's really important. Toughness can sometimes be misconstrued, or it's not about being hard on yourself. And I've made that mistake in the past of being really, really hard on myself, thinking that would improve me or make me achieve more or help me to get to where I wanted to be. And I've realized as I've got older that a lot of that can be pretty unnecessary and unhelpful, especially if you have those sort of tendencies anyway, I've found that I achieve more by being more positive with myself these days rather than being negative. And that's been a significant shift for me because I always use the fuel of talking to myself in a negative way, which has a very sort of brief period of helping you, and then it can become pretty toxic. And
it's quite a cumulative effect, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just layers and layers and layers of negative self-talk to motivate yourself doesn't really, it ends up weighing you down.
Exactly. I think you get one shot at using that. And then if you keep if you get into the habit of using it, then it does become pretty toxic and you can end up in a pretty dark place where I have been at times. And so I've probably got more compassion for myself these days in terms of recognizing my effort and my responsibilities to myself, which isn't necessarily about black and white achievement or did this or didn't do this or pass, fail, whatever. And that's been a real shift for me.
Just looking at the whole picture, aside from immense leadership qualities you obviously have and friendliness and all that kind of thing, that's you. When you left the army, did you see a lot of people go different, lots of different directions, up, down, sideways? What sort of some of the outcomes that typically happen to soldiers? Yeah,
it's a really tough time, that period. And I was very naive. I was certain, I felt certain that I'd had enough of the army at that point. And looking back, I really hadn't. I probably was in need of a bit of a break for sure, because I'd been very busy, away a lot, young family, and I was pretty tired. But that could have been solved with a extended break or 3 months leave without pay or something like that. But I thought, no, I'm done. So, and that was probably the hardest period of my life for sure. That period of leaving the military, because and I had no point of reference for it. All of a sudden, I just woke up not being a soldier, not a part of anything really. And I had no point of reference for who I was other than being a soldier and being in the military and being a commando and all that sort of stuff. That was at the core of my self-identity at that point. And that was sort of ripped away from me. And I was lost and I didn't understand it. I just couldn't work out. I had no prior experience with any sort of depressive symptoms or periods of like that or anything like that. So I thought, what is wrong with me? And I just felt terrible and I couldn't sort of work out what was going on until a counsellor pointed out that I was in a period of grief and I was grieving that person that I used to be and that life that I used to have. And I needed to really acknowledge that grief and deal with it in order to to move through it. And it wasn't until it was explained to me like that I realized what was going on. And I think that's a very similar experience that a lot of guys have. And there's a lot of talk around PTSD and all of these pathologies that are attributed to soldiers who have left the service, and I think there's a misunderstanding that PTSD is related to specific trauma or something that you saw this and that you have these flashbacks and nightmares, and I'm sure that happens to people, but I firmly believe the majority of ex-serving members are suffering a loss of identity and connection. And that's where the pain is, when you leave an organization like that and the people you worked with and who you were in that place, that's the hardest part to overcome, that loss. of yourself and that loss of identity. And that's a real challenge to overcome.
Does it feel like part of it, you were formerly an important cog in a machine, well-oiled machine, and all of a sudden you're drifting and you're like, what does a cog do on its own?
Yeah, no, exactly right. You really had a hard time with that. And, not dissimilar to the stories you hear about athletes when they retire, and you just lack a purpose.
Yeah.
And if you don't immediately find something or have something there that can replicate that, or at least go some way towards replicating that, that's a really, really challenging time. Fortunately, after, 6 or 7 months of really struggling with that, I ended up getting in as a firefighter, and that was a decent enough replacement for that. For the, again, you're back in working with a team, great people, solid organization, doing it again, a difficult job. It didn't tick all the boxes that the military did, for sure. That I still longed for elements of my previous life, but in terms of the connection, that came back.
The smell of Dankerob in the locker room almost.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Yeah, it's funny what you miss really when you close the door on something.
Absolutely.
And when it's wrapped up in your self-identity like that, and self-worth and all those motivational tools and stuff, you're like, what is the application of any of that once you close the door on something like that? So what did you do for the next steps? When you, after that 7 months and you sort of realized what was going on, how did you rebuild your life with such a finely tuned skill set and no application?
Yeah, look, it wasn't easy, and I made a ton of mistakes. Because I was still learning about all this, or learning about myself and about everything. So it was a challenge. I didn't really come up with it wasn't until much later on that I'd sort of developed a bit of more of a plan and more of a routine around the things that I needed to do. And I learned a lot of that through trial and error, but I did go out of my way to expose myself to a lot of different concepts and a lot of different ideas, way more than I would have if I hadn't been put in that situation, So I became a voracious consumer of books. I'd always been a reader, but really ramped that up. Podcasts played a huge role, listening to people talk about these things and just sort of exposing myself to a lot more information. And some of it was nonsense, or not nonsense, but didn't apply to me necessarily. And some of it was fantastic and life-changing, and then I was very fortunate to have, such a strong family support network, my wife and my 2 children, who were kind of like the guiding light through those really dark periods. But there were certainly periods where I was never suicidal or never really entertained thoughts of doing that. But I certainly had periods where I recognized why people would do that. I was given at times a glimpse into that sort of world, and I had, just had a really difficult few years of navigating that. And I did all sorts of counseling. I briefly tried medication, which I didn't really like. And then it wasn't until a few years of muddling through that I really took ownership of my own sort of state and my own welfare and everything, and said, it's up to me. No one's going to help, or not no one's going to help, but no one's going to do it for me. And I have to really take ownership of it. So that's when I started implementing more non-negotiables with myself, that this is what I have to do to be the person that I want to be, and to be who I feel like I should be. And I've managed to sort of build up some momentum with that over the last few years, and really, get myself into a reasonable state. But I still have periods where I regress and I'm sort of stuck in those old ways. But I'm far more capable at pulling myself out and getting myself back on track these days.
Now, having almost a unique experience, a uniquely masculine experience, going to an all-boys school, sport, which is kind of, in some ways representative of battle on the battlefield and that kind of thing, and then actually into the army. What's wrong? What do you think's wrong with men these days that our suicide rate's so high? In I think it's 5-to-1 men to women as well. Like, having such an insight into what it is to be a man and test yourself as a man, what do you think's going on there?
Boy, that's a big question. It is something I've thought about. I have some friends, some very close friends who work specifically in that space, and it's very much a combination of factors, obviously, but I think it's really important for men to be men, and to be the right type of man, and that involves like celebrating or at least acknowledging masculine qualities and masculine needs, and a lot of that revolves around, obviously, physical exertion is a big part. So making sure that your life involves something physically difficult, and whatever that looks like for you. If you can do it with other people, with other men especially, even better. That is a really important part of it. And I think if people can do that, if men can do that, that goes a long way to sort of nullifying a lot of that just background anxiety and background feelings of discontent and things like that. So I'm a big believer in the need for struggle, physical struggle, and that can take many different forms. I was very fortunate while I was in Abu Dhabi that I decided to go down and try Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for the first time. I dabbled a little bit in other things over the years, but, combat sports, but never really pursued it. But just thought, I'm going to give this a go, because I had, at that point, I was sort of I didn't have any real interests outside of work, and I was pretty, I felt like I needed something. And that, for me anyway, that ticked a lot of those boxes. So it was very physically demanding. The environment is great, and it's great. Look, that's great for women too. Tons of women do it and are great at it. So it's not a male only thing, but I think it's just important as a human to experience that. And that has become my thing, my antidepressant, my therapy, and I just love it. In fact, I was there a couple of hours ago before I came here. So, so that was a big one for me. And I think if people can find that, it's really important. There's probably more societal things that we do or don't do these days that are having an issue with the men and issues that a lot of men are having, and it's a really difficult one to solve. But the lack of, which is why I think like schools do have a significant role to play if they can do it. But having these rites of passage almost that traditional cultures have had for thousands of years that we've sort of lost these days, unless we go out of our way to create them. And I think they're really important for young men to do.
Yeah.
And to acknowledge how important the men are in society. And look, it's a complicated issue. And we all either know someone personally or secondary connection of someone who's taken their own lives, and it's just it's heartbreaking, and it's very complex, and I don't know how to solve it, but we've got some work to do.
Yeah, it feels like society sort of turned on the idea of masculinity, because it's not often you hear the word masculinity said without the word toxic in front of it. And when you see like small school, like I never played soccer because I was sick of the guys whinging and flopping and yelling to the ref, and basketball to some degree is a lot of that too. After playing gridiron, like you're probably unconscious when you're walking back to the ref, like you're trying to just make it look like it didn't hurt. That was the kind of mentality. And it's almost like they're like a wimpy, dobbing nature kind of became a thing. And like, I don't know, I just sort of think there was a lack of real and it's not toughness, is it? It's like really a lack of sense of just get up and get on with it. Are you dying? No, keep going, get on with it. And I think that sort of has been lost in a society's level at some respect.
Yeah, for sure. One thing I've noticed in recent years is we've become celebrators of victimhood. We really look at that person who is such a victim of this and this and this, and we kind of celebrate that instead of, there are things that happen to people, right, that are real and shouldn't happen, and we should be, as a society, trying to have less of those things happen. But I think in a lot of ways, bad things can happen to you, but victimhood is almost a choice, and we've kind of celebrated that, I think, and taken it a little bit too far. So you see people tending to make excuses or what, you come up with reasons why they couldn't do this or why they didn't get this, and some of those are real. But regardless, you should be striving to overcome them, not just sort of, this happened and now
what do you do? Stop.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we can certainly acknowledge that the wrongs of our society without sort of